I would say, first of all, Díomh Galéir, Cordia, agus a Cuidahori Solas Nua, agus Luchtla Nuna Feliicta Nuc Nua. And I know everyone in the audience is fluent in Irish, so there's no need to translate. But on this gorgeous autumn evening in Washington, you're wonderful for showing up. Our mission in Solas Nua, I'm Paddy Mescal, the chair of Solas Nua. Our mission is to bring the best of contemporary Irish art and artists to Washington, which is fine, but what makes it joyful for us is when people show up like yourselves, and you could choose to be in the bar or somewhere else, but you choose to be here to engage with the artist and the art. And I can tell you, I think I can promise you that when you're going home this evening, you'll clap yourself in the back and say, I made a wise decision. Because I think we're going to have a wonderful evening with Conor, Jessica, and Elaine. We are the only organization in the States that's exclusively dedicated to contemporary arts. And we've been around since 2000, and we are very proud to have a really wonderful partnership with NYU, whose staff and people are wonderful to deal with and friendly and competent, which is sometimes an unusual combination, but they have it here in spades. So thank you to Tom and to Polly and to Sarah and all the staff here for being so great, and to Culture Ireland and the Irish Embassy for helping sponsor the tour. Conor, Jessica, and Elaine started off in San Francisco, then went to Houston, to Denver, and this is their last but best leg of the tour. So I'm delighted that they're here. In 2016, Ireland reflected on 100 years of independence, and I suppose the country, in a way, did a performance review in itself. In the 100 years or so since independence, how did we do? And how did we do, particularly, I think, in relation to one paragraph in the proclamation that was part of the Rising in 1916. And that part reads, "The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights and equal opportunities to all its citizens, and declares its resolve to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation and all its parts, cherishing all children of the nation equally." So the country began a conversation, how did we do? And we had wonderful successes and terrible failures. And the artistic community played a huge part and continues to play a huge part in that conversation. Ireland is changing dramatically. Many people would say we're in a post-Gaelic, post-colonial, post-nationalist, post-Catholic society. Polish is now the second most spoken language in Ireland. Much more than Irish is spoken. We've passed referendums and legislation relating to abortion and gay rights. Core institutions that used to be revered and that the citizens were intimidated by, the church, banks, have now a huge hole to dig for themselves to gain the respect and liking of the people back. We're in a place where we have a huge economy, roaring economy, but homeless people on the streets and people on trolleys in hospitals who can't be seen because the queues are too big. So the country is in a huge, I would say, dynamical change. So the politicians have their say, and the academics have their say, and the economists have their say. But to me, the voices I really want to hear are the voices of artists, because artists have a special view and a special perspective and a special insight. And I, particularly myself, are very sensitive to the views of poets. Sebastian Barry said about a month or two ago that in his view, we're in a golden age of Irish literature. And some people would say it's even beyond literature, that with our recent successes in film, architecture, fashion design, theatre, visual arts, that this may be a golden age of Irish culture. And that's one of the questions I would like to pose Elaine and Conor and Jessica after our readings. But if that's the case, then you'd have to say, well, what's the role of poets? And what's the role of poetry? In Ireland, from the pre-Christian times right up to about the 16th century, before the real Gaelic civilization got badly beaten, the position of the poet in Ireland was both exalted, feared, and respected. The Irish word for poet is fila. And fila comes from an old Gaulish word in France that means to see beyond, to see through. And I suppose you could say that that's a primary role of poetry today, which is to help us to see through, to see beyond, to help us challenge and confront our own views of the world, our understandings of the world, and help us maybe see beyond that and come to new understandings and new connections. Some little pithy sayings about poetry that I love. In a good poem, the poet disappears. That's what the struggle with language is all about. Against barbarity, poetry can resist only by cultivating an attachment to human fragility, like a blade of grass growing on a wall as armies march by. Poetry is about making the personal universal. To see so intimately into the lives of others, we do this to understand, to feel echoes of our own lives in them. There's a lot of consolation in poetry, knowing that we're not alone. And the last one on this is Bob Dylan tells a story about Sam Cooke, the great soul singer, etc. Sam was complimented that he had a beautiful voice. And he said, well, that's very kind of you. But voices ought not to be measured by how pretty they are. He said, instead, they only matter if they convince you that they are telling the truth. So I would say that our three poets this evening passed that test of telling the truth. Jessica and Conor and Elaine are important poets. They have received many, many prestigious awards nationally and internationally. They have their own books published. They have been published in some of the most prestigious journals in Ireland, the UK, Europe, and the United States. And they have toured and done readings in all those countries. Their poems explore new and ageless topics, but each one does it, and you'll hear it tonight, in their own distinctive and strong and powerful and confident voices. These are different voices, I think, as you will hear. Also, I have to tell you, these are three of the nicest, warmest, wittiest lads you'll ever meet in your entire life. And I hope you stick around afterwards to, at the reception where their books will be on sale, etc. The program will go a little like this. Conor will read first, then Jessica, and then Elaine. Each will read for around 15 minutes. Then we'll have a Q&A. Then we'll go upstairs and have a few glasses of wine and cheese and stuff like that. Some books for sale, and the lads will sign them and then chat. And please take advantage of that. They may not be here together again in Washington, and you'll have a unique experience. I was going to read out a whole list of their accomplishments, but you can get it online. But they're highly accomplished folks. So if you don't mind, thanks you for showing up, and let's give a nice, warm Washington autumn welcome to Conor and Elaine.
Paddy's left his bag. God save all here. Let's try that again, shall we? I think the standard response is when somebody says God save all here, you say God save you kindly. Okay? Hold your fire now. We're going to do it again. Okay? God save all here. Thank you. The source of that little folk custom is, of course, The Quiet Man by John Ford. I love that movie. I really, really love that movie. My father was the image of John Wayne, so much so that our best friends on the street that we lived in at home referred to our father as Rooster, after the John Wayne movie Rooster Cockburn. So I'll start with a poem about my father. Paddy's a nice chap, isn't he? He is. I'm Irish. I disguise it very well. Sometimes I feel very Irish, and sometimes I feel not particularly Irish. And sometimes I don't give a stuff. Tonight, for some reason, here in Washington, I feel very Irish. Maybe it's the fact that I got sunstroke, or something quite close to it. Who gets sunstroke in October? The Irish guy from Dundalk. Does anybody know Dundalk? Okay, let's rephrase that. Does anybody know the real Dundalk? Yes, we got one at the back. That's my hometown. It's not a very nice place. It's kind of like Scranton, Pennsylvania. My father died a couple of years ago, and I wrote some poems about him. This is one poem it's the first poem that I wrote about my father after he died. My father was a sort of classic Irish dad. He was a roaring alcoholic, and none of us saw him for the last 15 years of his life. At his funeral, somebody asked me, "Did your father ever quit the drink?" And I said, "No." And they said, "What, like never?" And I said, "Well, when he died." You know, which he did actually, packed it in completely, never went back on it, cold turkey. So, you know, it was an impressive achievement. This is called My Father Hangs Around the House Far More. My father, after he died, seemed a much more substantial presence than before he died. My wife's father was a scholar of Russian literature, and somehow that seemed to become part of my father's identity, his posthumous identity. My father hangs around the house far more. My father hangs around the house far more now he's dead. He has even quit the hooch. No white knuckle ride this time, no chaining pots of tea to knock a hole in some unslakable thirst. One day he just stopped. You have to respect that. He keeps the place immaculate. Also, there's no more plomoss or endless ready-salted yarns. Now his words happen the way remote islands happen to be surrounded by silent sea. He is, in fact, every inch the guy I've always fantasized being. Granted, the attic clattering at all hours got a bit much. He claims he was looking for a ball sliced onto Laytown Strand decades before I was born. I had only to raise it once. Since that once, not a peep. He's been devouring Anna Karenina for weeks. He says the difference of emphasis in the original is really striking. Maybe I'm missing something. Last I checked, Russian wasn't one of his languages. He hadn't read any of the translations, and realism in general was never his speciality. Still, it brings out a glimmer of his old self. After every chapter, he slaps it shut and paces the rug with fists balled in his slacks back pockets, and with that smile and wild, faraway look in his eyes he always had between placing the bet and the race. Some girl, that Anna, he laughs. Some madam, that Karenina. He is clearly oblivious as to how it ends. No way he's hearing it from me. Me poor father. Jesus. Oh, no. Don't be clapping between the poems, for God's sake. You'll be giving me a big head, a bigger head. This is a poem called Ring. One of the things that I really like and like to write about and I'm inspired by is language. There is a gorgeous apocryphal etymology that suggests that the Irish word for ring, this is actually my wedding ring that was my father's wedding ring. As my mother said, I hope you get more use out of it than he did. And the Irish word for ring is fáinne. And it has been argued that the Irish word for ring, fáinne, entered the American lexicon in the late 19th century due to the practice of selling by immigrant communities, including the Irish, the practice of selling fake gold rings. And that the Irish word for ring, fáinne, you know where I'm going with this, but I'm still going to go, entered the American lexicon as a word for all things fake or of dubious origins. And that the Irish word fáinne is in fact the origin of that wonderful American word for all things fake or of dubious origins. It's a good story, isn't it? It isn't true. But the reason why we are here all together in this room tonight is that given a choice between a good story and a true story, we like the good story. This is called Ring. It's funny the way things go. I go to speak at length on the length of a lunar cycle and bite my lip. It's as if I think those words for love I love are tied on the tip of someone else's tongue and think again. I have learned to mosey downtown in a hand-me-down suit when it suits me, and the light shines gold, like the gold of apples, through the shutters of half-shut stores. I have learned to sing dumb, halfway between the song of a brass band, a handful of blocks behind me, and the harbour in its finery, until now, whenever now comes. Whenever it comes to language and the heart, and not meaning to sound phony. I am in the dark. I mean, I could hold and hold on some corner, hoping for a start, and start hearing myself breathe, the silence of silent callers. So tonight, for one night only, this caller's pronouncing moon, as if the moon were a freckle, like the freckle on your wedding finger, and my mouth were full of quarters. I'm just going to read 4 poems. I think it was Mary Heaney, the widow of my great friend Seamus Heaney, who said that nobody ever complained that a poetry reading was too short. And I would like to leave some time to talk. So I'm going to move from a poem about the wedding ring to a poem about my ex-wife. I thought this had a... You okay with that? I thought this had a natural reciprocity. Today is her birthday. She's great. And she's actually in New York at the moment. And the poem is dedicated to her. We broke up 10 years ago, and we used to live in a house in North Carolina together. And I went back for a 1-semester position. And I used to do a silly thing. I used to go and park outside the house and look at the house and sit there for hours. Don't ever do that. That's not good. It's called Kingdom Come, and it's for Vona. That arts and crafts house still for sale, shutters all always shut, is the safest place to park, blaming the market they shipped north. Who'd have thought a year would find me stalking our old selves, while neighbours wheel their trash to the sidewalk for the morning. Mostly I mark papers by light run off the alternator. Though lately I've been praying, lady, that whatever kingdom come there is a street we owned a place on, where the life we meant to love and ran screaming from midstream completes itself without us, and its evening over and over again. a piece of plantation house chandelier is dismantling the last bars of sun into bits and bobs of iris. In the yard, each lost wish still chimes, even though there's no wind. There is a barometer stalled on fair, a slow air remastered on the squeeze box. The sea gone miles out of its way is there, in a screensaver reflected in the screen door. And our airs are there, in the ping-pong and hip-hop of the garage's murk. And I, in some shape or form, am there as well. And you are there. That pronunciation, as I was reading the poem, I was thinking to myself, how am I going to pronounce garage? And I thought, come on, man, go for it. Go for the American. How did it? Yeah, it was great. Jesus, don't all step up at once, for God's sake. And finally, et enfin. This is called fall. Yeah, I mean, I like words, and I love American words. I have a poem called Swell. I had a Chicago colleague in Wake Forest University in North Carolina, and everything was swell. And I thought this was really kind of cute and exotic, really. So I wrote a poem called Swell. This is a poem called Fall. And it's about that lovely word that you guys have for autumn. But the poem takes the form of a series of dictionary definitions that get a bit stranger as the thing goes on. There is a couple of things in it. There is a reference to the tune by Sidney Bechet, As-tu le cafard, which means, well, literally it means, have you got the cockroach? But le cafard is Baudelaire's term for his metaphor for depression or the blues. So loosely but more accurately translated, it could be, have you got the blues? As opposed to, do you have the cockroach? Which would be a pretty strange title for what's your new song called? Have you got the cockroach? Okay. So yeah, really nice to be here. Really nice to sort of spend the evening with you. We've been all around everywhere. It's kind of like a poetry trip equivalent of Spinal Tap. And this is the puppet show at the end. If you know Spinal Tap, you'll know. Yeah, okay. I would like to pay tribute to my fellow poets, Jess and Elaine. I think they're wonderful people and wonderful poets. We've had a lot of fun, and my liver is that where your liver is? It's quite sore. Fall. To unbalance. To keel over accidentally or submit to the pressures of gravity. To plummet in worth, especially currency. To lose altitude. To take place at some preordained time and date. To swallow tall tales at face value. To lag such a distance back along the trail as to disappear from view. To surrender, especially a country, to the enemy camped in its margins for all of 2 nights and 3 days. To vanish from the radar of grace. To have no qualms any longer when it comes to telling friends and foes alike precisely where to stick their olive branches. To be the kind of sap who lapses now and then into clandestine amorous crushes. To indulge a whole continent its own broadleaf syllable for autumn. To arrive back unexpectedly in the afternoon and happen upon yourself dancing a single-handed two-step on the landing to Bechet's As-tu le cafard. To go, especially too far. To leave some unknown pal a shot behind the bar and teeter out upon the dawn its parabola of stars, as wobbly on your pins as any newborn foal. To bolt awake on a balcony and see the horizon's twin set of med and azure in the blinky Palermo abstract that has lain open in your lap. To realize the only part of flight you can handle is the moment after takeoff into a blank of unmarked blue, when you feel like a kite getting nowhere fast or a balloon strung out on helium. To listen to sound effects CDs so often, every track eventually returns to the common denominator called wind in trees. To think the hymns of Ulrich Zwingli funny. To praise a glass half full of homespun pear brandy that tastes of lighter fuel. Also, to dwell on the bruise of one dropped apple. Also, to descend and keep descending until it becomes a sort of modus vivendi, a buzz. Also, to stumble and nonetheless to continue. And always to be happy to go down in history as anybody's fool, and somehow to believe in parachutes, and still to find it within you to forgive the leaves, whatever it is leaves do. Thank you.
If this is Spinal Tap, then I might be the miniature Stonehenge. We've had a lot of fun. It's so wonderful to be here, and thank you to Paddy and Polly and Tom and everybody who's made us feel so welcome here. We had a green room. This is really exciting. I mean, it was actually really hard to get us out here because we were so delighted with the green room. I'm going to start with, if I can find it, with a poem called Citizens' Assembly. And just to give you a little bit of background, which hopefully won't be longer than the poem itself. In 2016, the Irish government started thinking about a referendum to repeal the Eighth Amendment to the Irish Constitution, which was an amendment that equated the life of the unborn mother or the unborn child with the life of the mother, which obviously was not an ideal situation in many, many different ways. But it's a Conservative government, and I think they were hoping to kick the can down the road by getting together this Citizens' Assembly who would advise on what should be done about the Eighth Amendment. And they assumed that this cross-section of Irish society would be very conservative. Thankfully, they were wrong, but it got me thinking about the notion that I think in some ways constitutions can really kind of confer voting rights on the dead rather than on the living. And one little reference in it to John Charles McQuaid, who was the Archbishop of Dublin, who worked with Eamon de Valera to be a kind of a major architect of the 1937 Constitution. Citizens' Assembly. We called a meeting with the Catholic dead, got little sense from them, but it had to be done. One woman in mob cap and woolen shawl ranted about peelers, the price of flour. A bewigged man condemned the whoredom that had left him poxed. A fat man took an apoplexy over women's rights, died all over again, while wan adolescents thronged the back, coughing blood. A lechery of priests were first to comment. McQuaid in scarlet stepped forward to speak for us all, owned they could not agree on anything except that no decision should be made without the input of the faithful departed. Life is too serious a business for those with eyes clouded by a future. Thank you. I'm not like Conor. I won't say not to clap. I'm delighted. No, and the murmuring is lovely too. I love a good murmur. It's really nice. The next poem I'm going to read is called Poetry, and it's inspired by the notion that, I mean, Ireland is a great place for the old tradition. Now, we love it. And often in poetic circles, tradition can come with a hefty dose of kind of disapproval at anything slightly different. And there can be quite an atmosphere when you try to read something that's maybe maybe a little bit more contemporary, or even the stuff that engages with politics and things like that, you know, and that can be a bit of a no-no. And I was thinking about a trip I'd taken to California in 2016, where myself and my husband stayed in this beautiful little kind of heritage log cabin up in the very north of the county. And I don't necessarily believe in ghosts, but I believe in atmospheres. And the atmosphere of disapproval in this particular heritage log cabin reminded me very much of the atmosphere of disapproval you can get at certain poetry readings in Ireland. Poetry. This suite comes with an attitude. Can you feel it? It is a heritage attitude available to guests on an honour system. It has many weathers and came here with this colonial house, rolled here on lumber when natives burned the old town. As you can imagine, it may not be compatible with modern attitudes, but do enjoy its oldie-timey quirks. If you wake to find it's hidden your contraception, don't be alarmed. Just an in-house joke, and we carry extras at a small cost. It may also manifest as a flickering light bulb, furniture moved in the dark, an ice sweat in the middle of the night. Sit back, relax, and witness these rare natural phenomena. Someday we may wake to find the attitude has moved on to other hunting grounds. So enjoy it while you can, and hope for our sake that it outlives you. The next poem I'm going to read, it was inspired by, I suppose we have these, you're never sure how much people are aware, but we have this terrible legacy of industrial schools and Magdalen laundries in Ireland, and it's something that we're trying to come to terms with at the moment. You know, these industrial schools were often places where underprivileged or delinquent children, or just children who didn't fit the mould, were basically incarcerated, and there was terrible abuse in these places. But you know, my dad would have grown up very close to a school called Traynor Industrial School in the 1950s and 60s, and he you know, I was kind of talking to him and asking him how aware he was of you know, how aware people were of what went on in these places. The interesting thing about the Traynor Industrial School is that there's a brass band connected to it. So these boys who were, you know, being terribly abused and mistreated would be taken out to play half-time at matches in Croke Park in the National Stadium, which was kind of an odd thing to happen to these boys who were basically incarcerated. So I asked my dad, well, what did you know, or what did you suspect about Traynor? And this poem is his answer. The Traynor Boys Band. Da used to swing me over the turnstile to see the Dublin matches. I remember the sight of my own legs dangling. I'd never see much of the game. What's left is the smell of men, their coats steaming rain and beer, being hoisted by my ribs above the crowd, the pitch spread out green and vast, the distance of it. And every half-time the band playing on the field, their music rising and falling with the seaweed stink that rushed in from the bay. Oh, there's the lads, Da would say, and he'd wag his finger in a warning that told me these matchstick boys made music because they were outlaws. Each cymbal clash a cry of mea culpa, and I imagined myself out there with them in this rainy Colosseum with my da as emperor giving the thumbs down, shaking his head for the loss of his son to that criminal gang, the bold boys of the Traynor Band. I'm going to read a couple of poems from a sequence that I have in the book called Witches. And this poem was kind of inspired by, I grew up in I'm an only child, but I grew up, that explains it, they all say. I'm an only child. And it's funny, in school, kids used to come up to me and in the Dublin accent, they say, "Are you a lonely child?" Yeah, kind of. No, I had great fun. But I was an only child, but in a really big extended family. And I was always that kid who'd get away with being in the corner of the room while the adult conversations were going on because I was quiet and a bit sneaky. So I was kind of probably more aware of all the dynamics in the family that I shouldn't really have been. But there were a lot of women in the family, and the women were loud and voluble and sharp and intelligent and shrewd, and mostly had to dedicate their lives to dealing with feckless men, kind of running around after them, which was a dynamic that was damaging for them and their husbands and everybody. There's a thing that happens, I think, when intelligence is turned inward, and it means that these people can become very damaged and can damage other people in turn. The interesting thing, I suppose, to preface just the first section, is that once there was a referendum in the 1990s. We love referenda in Ireland. It's just great fun. And there was one in the 1990s to bring in divorce, which wasn't available up until that time. And, there were people going, oh, Jesus, once the divorce comes in, all the women will be leaving their husbands. And, the Liberals, people know this is nonsense, it's ridiculous. But no, it was true. It was. That did happen. So the first section in the sequence is called The Witch's Love Song to Her Ex. You're a punch bag, a suit stuffed with duck down, a helium balloon in a furnace, but still you trip about forgetting your vitamins. A pint is not a meal. And between your pratfalls, lost jobs, unpaid loans, there are those tar pits we all tiptoe around. The abandoned wives, the children no one mentions because tar sticks and we don't like the look of your filthy shoes. You're a laugh riot, an ice cube on a stove, an unattended chip pan spitting your gold into our faces, and oh, how it burns our eyes. But we hide it in the tiny pockets of silence that line our clothes, that keep us afloat in dark water when we drag you yet again towards the shore. And though your warehouse is bare, we are out here waiting, we fixers of men, to pull the stones from your pockets, replace them with cups of tea that scald your balls as they spill, and to stop your mouth with slices of cake as we wrap 100 scarves round your neck and wind until you find you're choking. And isn't it only what's best for you? And doesn't it serve you right? There's a little bit more NSFW work, lingo coming up, which is my favourite thing. Not safe for work, but we're not in work, so it's grand. And actually, it's really more of a warning for Feeney than me now, but just so you're prepared. The witches demonstrate how best to catch a rabbit. Wait until the poachers have it gutted, spitted, sizzling, until they're lulled by the patter of fat on the fire. Then creep out of the trees, careful that the moonlight doesn't catch the bowie blade you've greased and wetted. The night may be cold. Thermals are advisable. Then grab a poacher by his cock and bring the knife up beneath it. Threaten to hack it root and branch so that he'll bleed out in the darkness with no ear to catch his frantic prayers. Then take your rabbit. Run. Thank you. And I'm going to finish with this poem, but there's great tradition in Irish of the praise poem and the curse poem, and this is the latter. The witches hex an enemy. May the jelly in your eyes be eaten by eels. May your guts grow fins and escape out of your arse. May the springs of your bed slice your back like rusted knives. May boils fester your balls. May sleep desert you. May you not have 1 second of ease. May the closing of an eyelid be a scalpel to your retina. May your enemies shit on your grave till it becomes a blackened monument. This we wish on you with the power of our mothers, our grandmothers, all our sainted aunts, God help you, and with the unformed id of our gestating daughters, whose vision is nightmare, whose magic is cellular, whose name is splinter, shank, scrawl. Thank you very much.
I would like to apologise for being an influence on Jess. She was a lovely poet in her last collection. we became friends, and it's all gone downhill since then. Or uphill. It's really, really lovely to be here. And yes, trigger. I know America is big into trigger warnings. We don't tend to do that in Ireland so much. We sidle up and then just shock everybody with our sadness. Jess spoke a little bit about industrial abuse, and it was a horrendous system. Anyone here in the audience that's Irish would be familiar with it, I'm sure. And what was particularly awful when they wrote the Ryan reports on industrial abuse in schools and the Fernman's report and so on was that they omitted the emigrant experience, that these people had just left Ireland and were left to their own devices in other countries. And this is a poem called Blood. I'm only going to read 3 poems, but I write like 5-6 page poems because I like the sound of my own voice sometimes. So this poem is a poem written about a boy that was born in a place called Ballinasloe in the west coast of Ireland. And he was born in 1916, Peter Tyrrell. And he left to go to an industrial school with his brothers called Letterfrack in Connemara, out in the wildness of the rocks and stones in Connemara. And there he was very badly abused. He ended up having a very colourful life, and eventually he set himself on fire in Hampstead Heath in London in a protest. And I wrote this poem in the first person narrative of his voice, which is always a very difficult thing to do, and you're not, entirely... It's not a comfortable place to be, but this is called Blood. I am a 7-year-old man on a green wet seat in Cricklewood. I am drinking tea from a paper cup. My stubble is itchy. I am thinking of my mother. I see her face in every young woman that passes me, scolding children, wiping their noses, grabbing their hands from the ends of little thin arms out through gilet holes, long wispy hair. I am climbing the tree in the park. I balance the tea paper cup between my teeth, and from up high I know I'll get a better view. Maybe I will find her, and we can play bow and arrows, and she can run up the street in her heels and red coat and be an Indian chased by this cowboy. I'll aim at her, but it won't hurt. I am 7 years old, and I have the hairy sheet over my head so that they'll think I'm dead. I saw a dead man once in a corp house. I was polishing the brass and they wheeled him in just like that. I don't know, did he look more like one of them or a ghost? I am 7 years old, walking through the aisles of a hypermarket, counting my change with my hand in my pocket. I have enough to buy a frozen steak and kidney pie and a small carton of milk. I will buy some cider in the off-licence on the corner because I can ask the woman there, is there any chance she might be my mother? But she never speaks. Perhaps she is deaf. My mother was tall with a red coat and a blue hat. We took the bus to Galway, then another to Letterfrack. I could make things there, she said, and it was a much better school than the one in Ballinasloe, she said. And she said that the birds stay up all night in Letterfrack, calling out to her brothers and her sisters in Boston. It's only over the sea, she said, and when they call back, that'll be them talking to me. She shows me the pictures from her tan purse and tells me their names, as she's told me before, but sure, I never remember. I'm only 7 and I haven't lost my top teeth yet. I tell her that I'm lonely and what if there's blood when I lose my teeth. And she grabs me by the hand and tells me that the teachers will wrap them into blue tissue paper, that she's packed it in my bag and I'm to put them under my pillow. I never see the blue tissue paper. I never again see my mother. I never hear the Letterfrack birds sing out at night time. And if I do, they're screaming like dying crows being killed to scare themselves, being beaten under a flour sack in the backyard of a farmer's house. I never see blood from my top teeth. I only see the blood that runs down the backs of my legs, and the only blue I see is the toilet walls as I wipe away this blood. I am 7. I am climbing a tree in Cricklewood. I am rubbing the blood from my thighs. I might build a treehouse up here and hammer these branches together and nail each one to another. I can stay in up here with the closed-in branches and this view, and it can be my own treehouse. I hold the cup steady between my teeth as I hammer, trying not to spill a drop. I'll have it for supper. And then I can go to bed and cover my head, and I can feel the rain drip dropping, but it's only water, and I think I am safe here in this house. But not one will hear me, and not one will come. And though the branches hold me tight with my tea, I know I might see my mother from up here. Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa. I know I will see my mother up here. So I teach history as well as English literature, and the high school history course in Ireland is for junior cert, so that's up to 15, is 95% male focused as a course, which is fascinating because they were all birthed by women, I imagine. And I asked the boys that I teach, how do they feel about the fact that, you know, all these lovely men are on the course and these fantastic men? They said, but sure, they can teach the women in the girls' school across the road. But it's the same course, it's the same exam they all have to sit. And they do a lot of research into women's history and so on, and it's fantastic because they realise, you know, girls are cool too. So this is a poem that I wrote called History Lesson, and it's about that, I suppose, the absence of voices. Just one reference is to a woman called Savita Halappanavar. If you're familiar with that case in Ireland, I suppose it was a watershed moment with regards to the repeal and the Eighth Amendment. She was a woman that died in the hospital in the town that I live in from not being able to have a termination of pregnancy. History lesson. The Stone Age began around 10,000 years before Jesus came, and then he made a lot of Christians. There were others too before, gods and stones and ages. In 2010, a man tells me I shouldn't wear purple tights if I have ambitions for middle management. It's all about impressions, he says to me, and right now you're giving off a purpley floral one. And the same with your tattoos and piercings and rotten teeth. I keep the purple tights on my legs. I have no rotten teeth, I say, and he keeps power mostly in his pants, and he has a mouth of silver fillings, I notice. My mother was born in a 3-bedroom terrace in 1955. She wanted to be a cowboy with a cap gun down on the street on Christmas Day. She says for some reason she's not mad about Indians because she never knew her history and it drives her mad. But she's a furious reader, taught me to be a furious reader, read us endless stories. People began to farm and lay down roots and make cheese, and they say that the first farm men were very clever men because they knew how to balance staying beside the sea and not getting themselves wet. My granny brings digestive biscuits into a London air raid shelter night after night, somewhere near St. Thomas's, she says, and she calls her first son, Thomas, my father. And he teaches me 3 things. I should always drive into skid marks on an icy road. He is the most important person in the family. And when I'm not a cunt, I'm not too bad at all things considered, he says. Nana is glad of the break from slopping out shit buckets in the hospital, but she's not as sure who's dropping the bombs down on them. She loves the evening company and they sing songs. She loves to sing, she says. Her mother died when she was 4 from a burst appendix, and she's never been very sure of anything except how much she loves to sing and how very tall and very handsome that her father was. She drinks a lot of brandy and smokes cigarettes. I spent 1 full hour convincing friends that women did say poems in Ireland before Evan Boland. The women friends are suspicious because they have English degrees. It's difficult to remember who first sailed around the Cape of Good Hope or of Storms. Was it Diaz or was it da Gama? But, you know, man stealing stuff has taken a Frankensteinian turn, or at least now some ass is keeping a logbook of all the bastarding things we are doing to each other. This would appear now to be a good thing, silk and spice being basic human rights, like diamonds and bread and the internet and hoarding. But we can say for sure that Magellan did prove the world was round, even though I heard once a woman was laying under a sycamore tree and watched a dappled grey horse gallop towards her, steely long legs appearing all of a shot, not making sense. And she is a long time pregnant, her nipples thick and dark. Soon she will give birth. And she knows that the earth is round because she can see the horse over her large belly. It's all too much of a sudden, and she knows it's a ball. She doesn't say it. And besides, Magellan died through his experiment. But you know, this is just a technicality. Christopher Columbus was a great man. In the small salmon bedroom of the terrace house, they put chloroform over the other Nana's nose on one of her 11 labours, and this child survives the birth. She's thankful for not losing another child. You did your duty, she said. You must do your duty. It was sometimes in the 60s. She wasn't too sure. She was collapsed, she tells me. Skip through Martin Luther, Jean Calvin, go straight to the Jesuits in class, they say. We are all Roman Catholic. It says it on our school doors. And we've cleaned up our abuses with pure machines as immovable as the mountain Crow Patrick. We can ruin you in this town. And Protestantism allowed a Randy King to marry a younger woman. It stands for nothing, and I've heard they leave their toasters out on the sink. There was never really a civil war in Ireland. A few brothers had a fight down in Cork or West Cork. Actually, I think it was in Mayo. Give it 5 minutes class coverage at most. Actually, I don't think you need to teach that at all. There's confession on that day. Michelangelo, Petrarch, Raphael, Dürer, now they were all great men. I could go on and on and on and on, and I will. 2015 is the first year I read a comprehensive list of female Renaissance artists. Sophonisba Anguissola was a friend of Michelangelo, and I bet he copied her. The Industrial Revolution was a great time, lots of great inventions made great by the Agricultural Revolution, lots of food to make all the men great. Many women also worked in the factories, but I don't know any of their names. They only teach us about a machine called a spinning jenny, and I think this is named after a donkey ass. In 2007, a doctor tells me I have a brain clot. I am pregnant, I say. I ask him of the option of a termination. He tells me, I will change my mind when I become a mother. I am a mother now, I say. I heard 3 women's names mentioned ever in my history class: Nano Nagel, Constance Markievicz, and Mary Robinson. And I try to imagine what they might do now. My first boyfriend punched me 7 times on Shop Street, and we ended up in the hospital because he put his fist then through the window of a shop my uncle works in. Very bad coincidence. But I am in terror in case anyone has recognised us both. The shame I feel. In 1927, women are banned from sitting on juries in Ireland. History lesson. In 1935, contraception is banned in Ireland. The hospital give me a card for domestic violence abuse victims, and I am embarrassed at how little they know about me and how much I can raise a man's temper and my poor ability to mind my men. I put the card in the bin and withstand another year for love. I cannot mind my men, I think. I keep this a secret for now, and I think of Mary Robinson and I feel a bit of a shit. It will take a decade before I realise I rise temper in nobody. It rises all by itself. This should be our very first female history lesson. Mussolini's rise to power was made easy by the colour of their shirts, the communists, the Treaty of Versailles, and his march down on Rome. And I meet the New York poet Ariana Reigns for the first time in 2015, and we drink ginger cocktails in a bar in Copenhagen, and I promise her I will use the word cock more in my work. Cock. I still cannot come up, I say to her, with the proper name for my own area of cock. I do like the word cunt, but I use it angrily at those I hate. But I am blown away by her and how the paper never refused her ink. The 1916 Rising was neither a rebellion nor a revolution. It was a thing apart entirely. It was a glorious thing with God and with glory and rising, and look at us all now. So I asked my class why the 1916 Rising has made them so happy, and they tell me it's better than being fucking English, although a few of them are English, but they also like being Irish too. I say that the men often sign the Solemn League and Covenant in their blood, and I correct the use of the word fucking as a race adjective. I have never taught with an openly gay teacher, but medieval times meted out cruel punishments, most of which are being perfected and used in the world today, though most come away from school thinking knights are cool, castles had great shooting windows, and how the past is the past, and the Enlightenment, oh how enlightened it made us all, particularly the men, who in turn could choose what to do with enlightening the women and all the other races they had to deal with. Savita Halappanavar dies in October 2012. I cannot stop crying. It's 2017 and my London bombing Nana is dead, and the salmon bedroom Nana is trying her very best to remember. I know you're probably dying to get out and go to the toilet. I'll read one last poem because it's Paddy's favourite. I want to say a very big thank you to Copper and Nickel magazine, to Wayne Miller there, to David Kiplinger, to Connor and Jess, who are the best roadie people. Well, you're not my roadies. We're all roadies. We're just roadies. Much love to Paddy and to Darlene, Mimi and Dennis at Solas Nua. Paddy's extremely brave in his curation choices, I will give him that. He had me over a few years ago and I have to really admire him for that. As you can see, we are breaking the form of the lyric. For better or worse, thanks to Culture Ireland and to Tom and Polly here at NYU, This is a poem called Mass, and it doesn't need much explanation, but there's also profanity in this, and Polly's probably passed out down the back now. And Mass, for anybody that has ever gone to a Catholic Mass, is a very long thing, and when I was a kid, I couldn't understand why I couldn't be on the stage and say it. And I think it's really nice now that I get an opportunity to do it. It's long, but it's a lot shorter than an actual Mass. And I teach in a Catholic school, and I haven't been shot or run over in one of those, what did you call those? Ambulance deaths or diplomatic car accident. I'm waiting, but you're all witnesses now, so if this happens, come and investigate. We send that secret police guy we were talking to today down by the White House. We chatted to this really lovely, was it Secret? Secret Service. And he had Secret Service written across. I went up, I said, "You're not very secret." He said, "I know, ma'am." So we did say, "How are you feeling about everything here?" I cannot speak about it. I go on.
You're looking for trouble, though.
Okay, Mass. And I apologise to anybody that still goes to Mass in the auditorium. I think our spirituality is very different to the organisation of the Catholic Church. I was in the Vatican Museum this summer. I am still not well. I'm reeling from it. I have no idea why I did it to myself. My kids said, "Please don't go in. You'll never shut up after it." Mass will be said for no more bad language and gambling and wanking that the Athenry boys are doing down the back of the castle, down the back of the church, and all the punching and the hitching and the groaning, moaning at the Turlough boys, the Clarenbridge boys, and the boys from Collimer Daly down the back of the presentation grounds. There will be Mass when you lose at the Galway races, and to save your soul if you take the boat to the Cheltenham races. They'll have a Mass for when the horse runs and when the horse dies, and for the bookies who win and the punters who win. There will be Mass for hair coursing. There will be a Mass for your intercert examination and your 21st birthday. There will be a filling out your college application form Mass. Mass will be held in the morning before the exams. We will have a Mass in the evening before your bath. There'll be a special Mass on Saturday afternoon for your grannies. There'll be a Mass for her boils and aches and black lung and ulcers and spots and diabetes and psychosis. There'll be a Mass to anoint the bollocks of the bull above in the field near the cloche over the railway bridge. Mass will be held before the college's Junior B hurling final. It will be held for the Connacht Cup Junior A regional final in wizardry and sarcasm. Mass will be held on top of the Reek Mountain for the arrogant and the meek, and the bishop will arrive up to say Mass in a helicopter. There'll be a Mass to get him up in one piece and back in one piece. Mass will be held for the safe arrival of new lambs and the birthing of ass donkey foals. Mass will be held in your uncle's sitting room, but the neighbours will be envious and they will later stage a much finer Mass. There will be a Mass to find you a husband and Masses to pray he stays with you. There will be a good intentions Mass where your intentions, if they're good, will come true. Mass will be held for your weddings and wakes and for when you wake up. Mass will be held for the Muslim conversion. Mass will be held for Trump. Mass will be held for the war on terror. Mass will be held for black babies and yellow babies and those kind of yellowy black babies. But Mass will not be held for the communist red babies. They have upset Pope John Paul again. Mass will be held for your brother when he gets meningitis from picking his nose. Mass will be held for all the cousins when they stop going to Mass. Mass will be held for the harvest and the sun and the moon and the frost and the snow, and for a healthy spring and then for a red autumn, and for a good wind and then for no wind, and for a good shower and a dry spell, and then for the silage and the hay and the grass and the turf. There will be a saving of the turf day. There will be a saving of the hay day. There will be a saving of my soul day. There will be multiple Masses for Mary around August when she did all her appearing. There will be a good Mass when the statue cries rusty tears, and there will be a great collection. Mass will be held for all the cloud people. Mass will be held to church your sinned body after you give birth. There will be Mass to wash your unclean feet. Mass will be held for all your decisions, so you never have to blame yourself. There will be Mass for the black Protestants, if Ian Paisley allowed it. Mass will be held for the Devil Eras and the Croke Park goers. And we'll have a great Mass for the conversion of the Jews and their collection. There will be a Mass for Christian angels, but only Christian ones. There will be no Mass for your freedom, but the air will be peace sweet and the sky might clear. Mass will never be held for the souls of your gay sons. Mass will not be held for the song and dance makers and the apple cart topplers, and there will be no women's Mass. There will be no Mass solely by women for women ever. They have very strict rules for the masses.
I'm in the I have that for once.
That's yours.
My one there, right.
This is mine.
So Polly has made me sure now that so there will be a person with a microphone on that side and a person with a microphone on this side. And so if you have a question, please do wait so that the microphone can pick you up, because we all want to hear your question. So when I'm in the audience in a session like this, do you know what drives me mad is when the lad like me says, now we're going to have questions from the audience, but I'm going to start with a few questions myself, and then half an hour later, like, the audience hasn't had a chance to get one question. So I am going to start with one question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience, who I'm dying to ask really tough questions, and I hope, I know you won't disappoint. So the first question I would like to start with is this. What is it like to be a poet covering the topics that you're covering in Ireland today, and what about Ireland today gives you joy, and what about Ireland today frustrates you as poets, not as parents but as poets?
It's terrifying. It's easier now after the referendums, I think. Maybe 10 years ago when I was writing this kind of work, I found it was terrifying, actually, and anxiety-inducing and not always popular. But I suppose do it and be damned. So what gives me joy? The two referendums gave me huge joy, the gay marriage referendum and the repeal and the Eighth Amendment to allow termination. Because I think we thought that there was a silent majority in Ireland that were very conservative. Yeah. Nobody was given their opinions, even though I was asking everybody, constantly, what are you doing in this referendum and voting? And everybody was very quiet. It was very strange. It was a really stressful time coming up, I think more to the second referendum. And the silent majority were actually not conservative at all, which was fantastic. And what gives me joy is that we are finally talking about the abuses of the church. And, the church is just another form of power and fascism. That can be in any type of, form in any country. It's not necessarily, it's just a powerful thing that, this is where the power is, this is where I go, and I can be this person in that. So so it's not just the Catholic Church, that's the history in Ireland. But I think that gave me a lot of, I was pleased. It was very sad, though. It was a really, really, really emotional time. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, and I would really agree with Elaine that we all thought that there was, and we were told constantly that there was a silent majority who weren't going to be happy with any of these new developments. And I think, was bringing it back to poetry as well, like there's still a proliferation in Ireland of the beautiful lyric poem, or the Misty Lakes poem, as I like to call it, which, there's nothing wrong with that, but there is a sense that there was a risk, I think, for a long time that Irish poetry would be a bit left behind. There's a way to kind of stare into your misty lake and go, the feckin' government at the same time. There is a way of kind of creating a synergy between these things, and I'm kind of buoyed, and I mean Elaine made reference to it, by the fact that there is good work still happening, and that there is a development into slightly more adventurous work. There's the influence of spoken word, and just more of a sense that kind of work, the work that speaks directly to history and politics, can move forward now into a new generation. I mean, the shadow of Feeney hangs heavy on us all, and before that the shadow of Yeats, and not that those shadows are bad things necessarily, but sometimes it can be very difficult to move from one era into another.
What gives me joy about Ireland? I don't live in Ireland. I'm different from these two. I actually don't live in Ireland. God help me, I live in England, and I'm married to an English woman. So, I mean, Ireland in some respects is a source of nostalgia for me. What do I like about Ireland? I like the fact that Dundalk are the Premier League champions again. I like the people. I like the pints. I share the joy of the new legislation. I really do, genuinely. But my sense is, and you come up against this, we have a sense in Ireland of ourselves being a new, liberal, modern country. But the old dark Ireland is still out there. And every now and then, just when you think that we are this wonderful, reformed European nation, you come up against that, and it ain't pretty. And it's still very dark and very deep-rooted. I also share the guy's sense of what's it like to be a poet in Ireland. I grew up in a big industrial town, and I wrote lots of poems when I started writing poetry about something I knew nothing about, agriculture, because that's what was expected of me. Irish poems were about cows and fields, and I wrote lots of poems about cows and fields, and I'd scarcely ever seen a cow in my life, to be honest. I grew up beside a football stadium, and there was a Chinese takeaway, and then there was the Harp Brewery. And I was writing about cows and fields. And at some point when I visited Dundalk, I thought, this is bullshit. I mean, actually going to... And the influence of American poets, that you can inscribe the landscape that you inhabit into the lyric tradition. And just not work within what's expected of you, but do what you want to do. And I thought, the influence of something like American poetic was really... and remains deeply influential.
Just on the power thing we've passed the legislation, right, but the boards of the hospitals are predominantly Catholic. So the health system can be there, but they're going to refuse. In the city that I live in, we have 3 hospitals, and my friend can't get a tubal ligation done in any of them, absolutely under no circumstances. Which is terrifying. She has 3 sons, it's terrifying. Yeah. So I don't know how this is going to play out.
So from yourselves, Quest, if you just put up your hand and we will give you a microphone.
Great talk, great recital, really enjoyed it. I've been in the States for 22 years, so it's lovely to hear the Irish accents and to reconnect with a modern Ireland. So this question is for the ladies. How do you feel you are respected by women in Ireland? Are you seen as fully fledged poets? Do you get support and respect from Irish women?
That's a really interesting question. I think I don't want to speak necessarily for the Poetry Society, but in society in general, I think we still suffer from a lot of internalized misogyny, and I think that we all, even in my generation, there's kind of an awareness of how much have you been indoctrinated to think a certain way. But I do think, I have a background in theatre as well, where women are hugely underrepresented in directors and playwrights in particular. I do find that we have far more forebears to turn to in Irish poetry, but as Elaine says in her poem, there is a bit of a sense that there was nobody before Yvonne Boland, that she was the first woman poet to have existed. So I think we're still struggling with that. And I think that we are I think that that's a kind of a supportive movement within the Irish poetry movement of women kind of clamouring for a bit of a recognition of those forebears. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I do feel supported, and I don't mean to sound flippant with this remark. I probably don't care enough about what they think, or actually care at all, but I can't. But actually, the support has been really, really amazing. I have really good friends who are writers, and Jess is one of them. We've corrupted Conor now. But I think that is a great question, and I don't necessarily, some of them would say to me, "You're very brave. You're very brave," and that's kind of code for you will never win a prize. And we have had a lot of these conversations, and I just think I have a really, really good best friend, Sinead. She's a Dublin woman. She's fantastic, and say it out. She just says to me all the time, she doesn't write poetry, she's a teacher. Just say it out, that's it. That's her thing. And my mother would say the same thing, say it out. We've been trying to put nice language. I do write some very nice poems. I do. But good question though. But I feel very supported by the women writers. There's a great group of new generation writers. Great group, and they're fantastic, because it's not an easy gig writing. But as my mother would say, you don't have to do it.
Can I answer that as well? The question wasn't directed at me, but that's fine. I'm cool with that. I think these guys are the future, really. I turned 50 last week. I was kind of expecting a round of applause there. But, no! No. Too late. And I feel spectacularly old. God knows what Paddy must feel. I didn't mean it like that, Paddy. And I've been on tour with these guys, and I've kind of, it's been really great and really eye-opening, and I think these guys are the future. Not just these, but other people doing what they're doing. The Irish lyric tradition is wonderful and has a great history, but it is very corseted. It's really male, and it's a very tight little lyric. I love the impurity of the work. I love this sort of indifference towards perfectionism, this kind of depressive male perfectionism. And I think this is a radical shift in Irish poetry. I'm not part of it. I'm one of the old farts. But, I think on behalf of the old farts... No, seriously, I'm not even trying to be funny about this. We've had it good for a while, we old farts. And I think, having seen lots of old farts like myself getting up and reading, think, Jesus. I think there's perhaps a moment for the old farts to step aside and let the tsunami come.
You got it.
Thank you, Conor. He's just tired and emotional after the 7 days.
No, it should be pointed out, in case this euphemism doesn't exist, that tired and emotional is a political euphemism for pissed. In reports of the Parliament, the representative returned to the House and was visibly tired and emotional. All right.
I was going to say that Connery doesn't look a day over 70, but anyway. Next question, please.
I just have a comment. As a student of Irish literature in Dublin in the late 1970s, I have to give a good laugh to Who Will Go With Fergus? Listening to the women's poetry today, it's just an incredible joy and change from the Ireland that I even remember from those times. And I think, the things that I studied there were all male.
Surprise.
I had one female professor, Hilary Barrow Robinson, you might know her name. And it's just like, wow, I can't even articulate how I feel listening to all of you, really, but particularly from the standpoint of being female. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I just say on that, though, I'm always conscious of the Evan Boland thing. I think Evan Boland's work is excellent.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a criticism of Evan Boland. It's a criticism of who put her there in that position, and that's,
Close the gate.
And close the gate, yeah.
Other question? Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. First of all, thanks for an outstanding reading, and it's just been wonderful. There's been a lot of talk about politics and the amendments in Ireland with the gay rights, same-sex marriage, and with abortion. What about the issue of kind of the North and Ireland? And, you mentioned some 1916, and certainly the poets were very involved in that. What are the poets saying about Irish unity today?
Sweet damn all, I would hope. What's happening? I live in the UK, but I grew up bang on the border. And there is this strange issue of Irish unity that has been come to the surface again with the Brexit campaign and vote and perhaps eventual legislation. It looks like we're looking down the barrel at what we call a hard border, an enforced border that had disappeared under the larger umbrella of a European Union. I don't live there anymore, but my mom lives like 3 miles from the border. And speaking as somebody who grew up in the 1970s and 80s there, in a place that was known nationally, sarcastically, as El Paso. Mm-hmm. Seriously, it wasn't fun. And the idea that our political leaders, I've said it in Denver, are prepared to do this. The one thing I'd like to reassure the people of America is that our political leaders are assholes too. You know, and I find it difficult when there is this political superiority complex in Europe on behalf of American politics. Don't get me wrong, your guy's a major asshole. But you're not alone in this.
I think that national identity is very problematic. I think it's very problematic, Irish identity. You know, we were talking about this yesterday. You know, the Celts came, then we had 800 years of awfulness, and then, you know, and it's become this kind of fairy tale story that's not actually entirely accurate. It's nice to have a story. All countries have a story, that's fine. But I teach a class where, you know, it's a real melting pot of cultures. We have Syrians now also, Poles, Lithuanians, Nigerians in the class. And I was just saying that for the first time before I flew out on Friday or whenever it was, one of my students who's here a year was able to tell his Syrian story to the class because he hadn't English when he arrived. And the Irish lads, oh Jesus, that was tough. And they were amazed at how tough his story was, but it was amazing at how they were connecting and how we were trying to connect them. And there's more that unites us than divides us as people. And I just find some national identity is lovely when Ireland are playing a rugby match, and it's lovely to support the soccer team. It gets very problematic when you do keep dividing and dividing and dividing, and you're somewhere down along that road a lot further than we are with the identity politics. And I know it's a very, very complicated area, academically and everything, and on the street. But I think there is more that unites us than divides us, and I can't know for the life of me why we don't all realise this sooner. Because as we said on the tour, we are all terminal cases. So we should, yeah, thank you.
But yeah, I mean, I suppose, you know, nationalism is an 1870s idea that creates borders, you know, and we're kind of in this place where we've had this weird resurgence kind of across the globe of these ideals of nationalism, which are 19th century ideas. And I think, as Conor said, we felt that we'd progressed to a certain extent, and now with Brexit, coming down the line the way it is, you know, we are all very distressed, and English politicians are not necessarily listening to people on either side of the divide, the sectarian divide in the north, and that's really, really scary. But I mean, I was commissioned to write a sequence of poems in response to Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal in the summer of 2016, and I was doing a lot of travelling for work at the time. And 2 days before Brexit, I was sitting in London, surrounded by people saying, "Oh, it's never going to happen, darling. No, couldn't possibly." You know, in Covent Garden in a cafe. And then, 2 days after Brexit, I was in a taxi with a Somalian driver. Going from Manchester Airport into the city, you know, and he was asking if he could practice his English on me, and I was saying, well, what do you think of Brexit? And he was saying, well, you know, there's no money to pay for all these immigrants coming into the country. And this guy was, I mean, he's a lovely guy, but he was practicing his English on the passenger in the car, you know. So it's something that I think we've all engaged with and will engage in more. But I think that to get to the point finally, the concept of the issue in the north has shifted drastically because of Brexit, from maybe notions of United Ireland to how further subdivision can threaten the stability that we've achieved.
I'm just going to, unless there's more questions. Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm thrilled that we're all here, that we're lucky enough to hear your wonderful poetry. And if you see that big thing up there, or everywhere, Dennis, who you gave a shout out to, has sent greetings to you from underneath the San Francisco Bay on the BART. And it was right before you read the poem that we most appreciate and love, your Mass. Can't wait to hear Mass, he says. Some incident awaiting police, but no interruption of poem. Loving it. So
Thanks so much.
yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's possibly the first time that the words "can't wait to hear Mass" were ever uttered. So nice one, Dennis.
So before we go up,
I do a great Mass.
So a couple of things. Those of you who have already bought books, Gurav Mila Mila Mahagwiv. Thank you very much. The lads will be happy to sign them above. For those who haven't,
Jesus, by the
for those who haven't bought books, they're dead cheap. They've given us a great break, so I would please ask you, and you can resell them on the street for twice the price. And but the last question I would have is, as poets in Ireland or Irish in England, like at what level, if any, do you think you are impacting Irish consciousness, Irish understanding of our place in the world? Like what? How do you know? How do you know if you're good in the sense of not the poems themselves, but you know, are you just preaching to yourselves and about 100 other poets?
That's a good question.
I'm not sure 100 other poets are listening to me. I don't know. I cannot answer that question. I just hope. I went into poetry for political reasons, and I mean that's probably very lofty and daft and naive and ridiculous. I had a bit of an Allen Ginsberg moment in my life, I think. I really went into it with the intention of trying to wake people up. But I'm not sure. I probably should have done an Instagram beauty account instead or something. I don't know. No idea. I really can't answer it. But I want to leave a witness to the time.
I think it's something you could really worry about far too much. Do you know what I mean? You could become preoccupied with the worry of it and who am I talking to and what am I changing. But I do feel that poetry is something, you know, we take, you know, we were talking about last night with some students about the fact that, you know, often when you're asked to talk about your work, it's really difficult because you think, well, if I could have said it, I wouldn't have written a poem. Yeah. And I think that sometimes poetry is something you tease out of your subconscious and you shape it in a way that you kind of try and figure out what you're saying. But I think the great effect of that can be is that it's not dogmatic or polemical. I mean, it can be, and that's brilliant too. But it's something that just could, if it's successful, slightly nudge somebody in a direction that they may not have gone before. And I think that's the aim, really, is to maybe change somebody's mind slightly, create a little bit of empathy, show them a slightly different perspective. And, you know, who knows whether that happens. You know, kind of posterity will tell us that when we're all dead because we're terminal cases, as Elaine says.
Yeah, no, Elaine definitely has been telling us how terminal we all are. At the most inopportune moments. There's a famous line from W.H. Auden's elegy for W.B. Yeats, poetry makes nothing happen. And it's frequently quoted at the expense of poetry. Yeah. I don't think Auden meant that. No. He was saying that poetry is itself a happening rather than it is a way of happening, rather than a thing that makes other things happening. Yeah? And I fully agree with the guys, and especially this idea of witness. The point of poetry is not to try and change what we're doing now, but I would like to think that people would look at our work at some point and know, or have a small sense through the poems, what being Irish in the early 21st century was like. What it really actually felt like. And I do like this idea of witness, of literature that actually, and we forget this with the literature, that the point of literature is to tell the truth. And it is a way of saying to ourselves and to our loved ones and our community, I know this happened. And I know that you know this happened. And you can pretend all you want that this didn't happen. But we both know it happened.
Thank you very much. So to Conor O'Callaghan, to Elaine Feeney, and to Jessica Traynor, thank you very much.